everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this workshop. My name is Brianne Gilbert, and I will be one of the moderators for this panel today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me go ahead and pull this up, and let me get back to the very beginning. Oh no, I'm spoiling all of our fun. I should have had that ready to go a little bit quicker. All right, let's get full screen mode. And can everybody see the, or at least for our panelists, can I get a thumbs up if you can see that? Thank you very much, Mariya. All righty, so as I said, my name is Brianne Gilbert. I am the Associate Director at the Center for the Study of Los Angeles. And I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Mariya Vizireanu, also at Study LA and a lecturer in political science. And three of our awesome students who are going to be introducing themselves here in a little bit. So I won't steal their thunder for all of that, but I am super excited. Luis, Simona, and John are going to be talking about the exit poll. So as Mariya and I put together this panel, our goal was really that we're able to do the introduction, and then we're able to moderate, and then we're able to get out of the way, and that everybody can hear from our students because they are the crux of what we do. So the title, The LMU Exit Poll, Shaping the Dialogue of Voting in Los Angeles. So just a bit about us at Study LA. You can see the faces of our Study LA team. Some of you are here joining us today. Thank you for that. But what do? We are a research center that advocates for a better and more equitable LA. And we do that through three main facets: research, student mentorship, and then engagement with residents and leaders. And we'll be talking a bit about that today. A little bit about us. We were founded in 1996 by our director, Dr. Fernando Guerra, and we have the opportunity to study Los Angeles. So we joke that it's a study of anything that happens in Los Angeles, and we have that opportunity to do a deeper dive into many of these different areas. And we have the privilege of being one of the leading undergraduate research centers in the whole nation. We hear a lot about research at universities. It's primarily done by graduate students when they're working with professors and staff are working with students. We have the honor of working with undergraduates. And we have become a leader in several different areas, one of those being exit polls, which we'll talk about today. Here's just a quick brief, just a synopsis of the major projects we do at Study LA. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mariya to talk a bit about our outreach.
Yeah, thank you, Bri. So guys, you see here a map of Los Angeles County, and on this map, each dot represents an Angelino we've engaged with through one of our multiple projects, as you can see on the left. The number of dots here is actually close to 36,000, and that's the number of people in Los Angeles County we've talked to through one of our projects since 2014. One of our signature projects is LA Votes. You see there in red. And through this project, it includes the exit poll and the quality assessment of the first polling places and then vote centers. So through that, since 2014, as you can see on the map, we've engaged with 10,000 voters on election day. Next slide, please, Bri. A little bit more about our outreach. Just last academic year, we've surveyed about 3,600 Angelinos through the projects that we've conducted. We always have several projects a year, depends on the year. And again, since 2014, we've engaged with about 36,000 LA County residents, and you already saw that on the map. Next slide, please. And again, in terms of LA Votes, our center's exit poll is the largest per capita exit poll in the nation. And our results have been some of the most accurate exit poll results for major elections in LA, which is also extremely exciting. After all that work, when we look at the results and we compare our results, they're so close. It's just fantastic. Next slide, please. So talking about the LA Votes project last year, in March 2020, we conducted the exit poll and the vote center study simultaneously, which you'll hear more about in just a minute. LA Votes is one of our most impressive fieldwork projects. As you can see, last March, we had 243 field researchers in the field all over LA County. So in one day, they visited 815 vote centers and collected 3,596 surveys in just one day. And the work they've done is so impressive. Everyone worked hard, not just to collect and organize all the data, right, all the physical data, but also to clean it and analyze it correctly and as soon as possible. So some of our results were already on the news that evening. All right, and now I'll have three of our amazing students, Simona, John, and Luis, to speak about their experience further.
Thank you very much, Mariya. And if anybody has any questions throughout the PowerPoint, you're welcome to drop them in the Q&A. And we'll also have a time at the end dedicated to questions as well. All right, John, take it away.
All right, so my name is John Andrikos, and I'm a senior international relations major. I've been at Study LA since like pretty much the first day of my freshman year back in 2017. I was really excited to do this project. It was actually the second, LA Votes project I ever did. My first one was with Luis in 2018. So I'm really excited to talk about what we found while we were out there. So next slide.
And I'm Luis Lopez, political science major, international relations minor. I have a similar story as John, also been here since my first day of freshman year, albeit a year later in the fall 2018. This was also my second LA Votes project. And yes, John and I go way back to that first one. And yeah, we look forward to discussing with you all about the most recent one we did back in March. Next slide.
Hi, I'm Simona. I'm a junior political science and psychology double major, and I'm minoring in peace and justice studies. And I began working at Study LA my sophomore year, which was the fall of 2019. And yeah, I'm really excited to share our experiences with you all today.
As we talked about, we introduced kind of the mechanics of the LA Votes project itself, but the results we found to be pretty impressive. And two of the highlights that we had was our data, well ahead of any other media outlet, actually predicted what would happen with the district attorney race, and which was a runoff election, which is what we called. So that was something that, we always, I remember the last one in 2018, we predicted the LA sheriff result in Villanueva's election, and that happened there. So we always love seeing that our hard work actually paid off. And Mariya and Bree, if you want to add anything else about this, since you did a lot of the deep dive on it, you can.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, John. So yes, the accuracy of the exit polls is something that Study LA really prides itself in, but really we would not be able to do if it wasn't for all of the students being willing to be out in the field. It makes for a very long day when they're out there, but being able to tally these results, and they'll kind of talk about that process a little bit later on, that Mariya has overseen for the last couple elections, is just something we're very proud of, and we're happy to answer more questions and talk about that in more detail a little later on.
All right. So in the months leading up to, just kind of looking at what we did, and we'll go more into this, leading up to the March 3rd Super Tuesday election, we had to practice exactly how we were going to collect this data. We knew that there was going to be, physical surveys that were going to be passed out to help assess the vote centers and also get exit polling data. But we thought we would try something different this time. In the past, what we did was, and Luis and I remember this, we would input hundreds and hundreds of surveys, manually in Qualtrics, which means you have to go through and answer each individual question on your own. And we thought that took too much time and we could do something different. So we decided to use scanning applications on our phones. And one of the apps that we used was called ScanBot, and we'll go more.
I think we lost John. He might be back. This happens.
It was definitely an experience, and we'll talk more later when we're in the field, that it led to some pretty tricky situations when we were scanning. So next slide, please.
You know what, John, it cut out there for a minute.
Oh,
Can you just explain a bit more about this slide, or explain what you did say out loud one more time so that we can all hear you?
For sure. Yeah, no. What we did was just kind of to sum up, I guess what got lost was we had to test like multiple scanning apps to try them out on hundreds of different surveys. And we had to experiment with lighting and angles and how to get shadow out of the frame, which was very difficult in practice in the field. So we'll get more into that later. So next slide, please.
Yeah. So after we had found the best scanning application, that worked to get the best possible scans for entry into to get all of our results, our next issue of concern was really how the app would work outside in the field, because working in an air-conditioned office with reliable Wi-Fi is one thing, but being in a field with the sun blazing down on you with sketchy Wi-Fi is another. So to get a feel for how scanning would work when we're out there in the field, I was offered the opportunity to conduct field simulations outside of the office. And I worked with a former researcher that was here, Vishnu Akela, and we got into a small car. We traveled to a local plaza nearby LMU. And for like about an hour to 2 hours, we were just scanning mock surveys, essentially in the parking lot, which is precisely what we did on the day, the actual election day. We'd have to find anywhere to park and just scan these surveys out. So we did that by, like John was saying, finding the best possible lighting, the best, trying to minimize shadows. So we would scan the surveys on the hood of the car, in the trunk, sometimes right there in the passenger seat. And no matter what, because other than getting the right possible scans, there's also the physical element of it. Like, it's not comfortable with your neck bending down or your back hurting, doing that for like a good hour and a half. So really, ultimately, it was to get a feel for it, like pretty much the whole idea of the field simulations, and the scans did eventually work. We were able to get good scans and get them into the system. But it was only a matter of really just, like we keep saying, just finding the right amount of light and just preparing your body to strain itself on the day of the actual election date. Next slide, please.
I bet you nobody thinks about these things when they think about just results of a survey, all of the level of detail that has to go into it.
So there were two roles in this study. We had the field supervisors and the field researchers. So John, Luis, and I, we were field supervisors, and we were teams of two. So it was a partner of someone who goes to LMU and then just a study LA researcher. And each team was assigned 6 to 9 voting locations that they were responsible for driving to multiple times throughout the day. So we'd make rounds. And then at each of these locations, we had field researchers. And as mentioned previously, there were 243 field researchers, all of whom were students at LMU and also Cal State Long Beach. And these individuals were all trained by Study LA researchers in the weeks leading up to it, because there were a lot of moving parts. So everyone had to know their job in order for the day to run smoothly. Next slide, please.
So each of us was assigned, as Simona mentioned, on our field research teams, we were assigned a route on which we would, go to different vote centers to pick up the surveys. And each route would have a few vote centers on it. That's an example of, I think this was Simona's route that she had, of kind of what we had to do. So you can see it's, there's a pretty long stretch of driving there that can take over an hour. On my route, I was in Compton, Linwood, Southgate, and Downey. That was kind of the distribution of vote centers. And we saw some interesting things. There were some vote centers that I saw, like there was one at a Masonic temple that had nobody in line. And there was one at an elementary school that had super long traffic. And Luis and Simona will go into their experiences, but what you saw in the news was, oh, there's traffic everywhere, all of the vote centers are jammed, when that was only the case for a couple of them. Most of them had no one there or just a few people there. So Luis and Simona, do you guys want to share about your routes?
Yeah, I was assigned to approximately 6 to 9 locations in the Pasadena, Rosemead, Arcadia. So like north, what would that be? Northeast kind of Los Angeles. And one of the things I witnessed during my rounds was like John was already starting to hint at, the variety and the length of the lines. The two examples that come to my mind immediately are Rosemead High School and some voting centers in Arcadia. I observed that Rosemead High School had little to no lines all throughout the day whenever I passed by to pick up those surveys. But for Arcadia, I noticed that these lines were a little longer, and it's definitely noteworthy and interesting to see these things, because I personally believe that these lines are an indication of both the center itself and how much room they could accommodate, and also its community's desire to actually want to vote during these times. Like, for example, it's entirely possible that there was no line at that high school because it was such a large gymnasium, so it could fit that many people at any possible time. But the other ones in Arcadia, which were like small churches or small elementary schools, they could have had longer lines easily because the center was just small, couldn't even handle that many people. But I've also noticed that throughout the day that these lines, I think, are varying on the time. That's one thing I kind of noticed during my observations, where in the beginning, like in the morning, a lot of the lines were long, excuse me, short, my bad. They were short because everyone's going to work and just no one really makes time in the morning. I just felt for that. But towards the end of the day, especially in the Arcadia areas, these lines got a little longer, even at those smaller venues, like I was saying. And a part of it may also have been just because the vote center was small. But even at Rosemead High School, which, like I was saying, even at night, I remember that line was still pretty short. So I think overall in the future, if people are still comfortable voting in person, we should be looking into having the size of a vote center match the voting rates of a community, because I think that can also play into how lines form, or the experiences that people have about going into a vote center in regards to how long they have to wait.
And can you just to elaborate on that a bit, what did you see in terms of how the lines and whatnot were discussed in the media compared to what some of your experiences were?
Yeah, so the media, like John was saying, number one was that, these lines are very long in these areas. But I definitely saw, I would say throughout the day up until between 6 to 8 p.m., lines were short everywhere, sometimes even not non-existent. Because I know at one point when we had to do some of the vote quality assessments, my partner, she was able to just walk into a vote center and come out in like 5 minutes because there was really no one in line. While for others that were longer, she took like a little longer. She had to get inside, she had to try to speak to someone. So definitely, I would say my experience does ultimately contradict the overall message the media was trying to send, that they were long. Just in my experience, anecdotally, I would say a lot of them really were short overall.
So, thanks, Luis. And this is something we just really want to kind of highlight, because by doing these exit polls, we are able to have a different sense of data than just, like he just explained, than only the anecdotes. And we certainly understand there were a lot of long lines. We saw lots of pictures, especially later in the evening, as he said, from that 6 to 8 o'clock. And then as people were waiting in lines, once they got there at 8 and then had to wait until it was their turn to vote, because the polls couldn't close until they were able to vote. That really wasn't the case everywhere. And that was something that, because of the work at Study LA and because of the time that the students spent out in the field, we were also able to kind of help with that dialogue throughout Los Angeles, even sending messages to the registrar recorder about, there's no lines at this particular place. So then he would try to get out that message. But what we saw was very different than simply the way it was discussed in the media.
And so, yeah, we did have some logistical issues that unfolded throughout the day. One of them was traffic. As John talked about in that picture on that last slide, that was like the area that I helped supervise. And there was an hour and 10-minute difference between two locations without traffic. And so when traffic got a little bit heavier and more individuals were going out to vote, it did kind of slow down our route, because then it took you longer to get to each location. And then when you got there, you had more surveys to scan than you anticipated. And so that took a bit longer. And then also, of course, as it got darker out, it did get a little harder to scan the surveys. And so my partner would have his flashlight on my, in the car in the trunk, so we can like be seeing what we're scanning, because they're also like double-sided. So we had to like develop a whole system and change it all when it got dark out.
I know in my experience, I think a common theme for all of the researchers in the field was spending a lot of time in the trunk of a car. I spent probably half the day in another man's trunk just because that was the only way I could get any kind of lighting. And it looks weird when you're pulled over, next to a busy street and I was in this weird, like half like fetal position. I had my phone up like this, so my shadow wasn't getting onto the surveys itself, because shadows were a big deal, because sometimes if you had any kind of shadow, it would completely throw off the results. So we all became, contortionists, light experts for a little while. And then when it got dark out, that was another problem, because sometimes if you shine a flashlight on it, the light would be too bright. That was another issue. So we had to, scope out parking lots, parking garages. Luckily this was pre-COVID. So if we had to go inside of a Starbucks, you could. So, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, Luis has some other experiences that are kind of like that too.
Yeah, I felt that a lot of these neighborhoods just simply didn't believe in parking. I've had to park in front of many driveways, fire hydrants, and like everything John was saying, even as you're struggling to find a good parking spot, you have to remember to get the right lighting and minimize the shadows. So even if I was able to find a nice open parking spot under a tree, the way the sunlight would just go through the leaves would mess up my whole shot for the survey. So that was a big issue, trying to find the spot where not only was it open and legal to park anyways, you also have to have the right lighting. And another issue that I came across was I actually had to transport some of the poll workers myself from one location to the next, because as we're supervising these teams also were ideally they're supposed to have their own car. But in my case, I remember there was someone who I believe had a medical emergency, so they took their car and they were like, "Oh, we need someone to transport us." And I'm like, "Dang, that was me." I remember getting the call from Ale. It was an unknown number too, so I was like, "Hello," and she was like, "Oh, please say my number next time," because I didn't have her number saved. So I'm like, "Oops." So she told me go like to a Starbucks like way off of my path, so I had to divert all the way over there to take that person all the way back to one of my locations, and that easily took a whole 1 to 2 hours. And it really sucks because you're on this time crunch, and you're still feeling the pressure to scan your surveys, get as many done as you can, and remember the lighting has to be perfect. And we're, as you can kind of sense, we're all stressing the lighting, because that was probably the biggest issue I got. There were so many surveys I just had to rescan because the lighting just wasn't right, whether it's too bright or the wind also played a factor too. At one point it kind of I had the right shot, it was on my hood, but as the wind came in I had to like slap it down on my car because the wind kept pushing it away. So I'm like, dang, come on, just stay still, work with me a bit. But despite all the troubles, we're still expected to scan and pick up these surveys. And yeah, that definitely was that threw a wrench at me to have to pick up the other people and take them to their locations. But ultimately it worked out, as you can probably already gather from our results and just from the enthusiasm from the leadership team, that yeah, we ended up doing a good job, but it was definitely not without its issues.
Can I add something real quick, as they're all talking about all this challenges and lighting, while our amazing field researchers are out in the field, more than 200 of them, there's also a small group in a different building that's receiving all those scans, working on them, cleaning them, making sure there's no errors, and then analyzing everything, weighing the data and getting it ready to release. So we had a team of 3 students and 3 researchers from our center. We got there in the morning, we were there all day. Speaking of neck pain, earlier, Luis, you were mentioning, we didn't get up from the table much. We were just like, all right, and next batch comes in, we have a whole list of steps we have to take. I printed them out in big words, put it in front of all of us, just in case we start getting tired throughout the day, and we just go through it and make sure everything looks good. And most of the time it was fantastic. Sometimes, again, like they mentioned, if there was shadow or too much light, the program wouldn't understand the results and would have to do it manually and impute that, and that takes even more. Sometimes it's not even about how you scan it. The people filling out the surveys, even though we were showing instructions how to do it, they would fill it out kind of funny or not mark the correct way. And so again, the program doesn't understand anything. We have to do everything manually. So all the work they did was so crucial for us because we're in a huge time crunch. We're trying to release results. We're tired, our eyes are falling out because it's been like 10 hours. And so all their work made our life so much easier. So great job, guys. Just wanted to note that.
Yeah, so some more information about the data collection and analysis. So on the day of, as we discussed, paper surveys were administered, and then each survey had a unique identifier based on the language that it was written in, the vote center is distributed at, and just like the survey number. And so on the day of the data collection, we would scan, and then it would all go into that central hub that Mariya was talking about. And the surveys were fed into an OMR software, which stands for optical mark recognition. And this is like most commonly used for like grading scantrons and stuff like that. And so there were around 1,300 surveys that were cleaned and analyzed the day of. And then we also had a lot left over that we were analyzing the days following. And so the way we do that is we would enter the surveys into that Qualtrics form that John was talking about a little bit ago. And so you would just take everything that you saw on the paper and input it to an online survey. And then afterwards, you were able to print that as an Excel. And so you had all the data in one place. And then an issue that occurred was, so we started, this was on March 3rd. And then on March 6th, that was the first day of our spring break technically, but we ended up not being able to come back to campus because of the coronavirus. And so LMU actually cut student employment. So we weren't able to work for the center remotely or help with this project after this last week of it. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so as Simona mentioned, this is more just like hats off to the associates at Study LA like Mariya and Bree, because typically they'd have us around when they're doing this. And I remember at for the 2018 midterm election exit poll, we did a lot of work in the days afterwards. But basically, yeah, so they only had us for about 3 days to help, and then they never got us back. And to this day, we haven't been back in person. But it was they were able to do a ton of work really fast without our help, and it just shows, I think, that just how professional and how good at what just doing the work of research the center can be, because it showed even without 12 student researchers helping, they were able to put out a really high quality report. So yeah, next slide, please. And then this final part right here is kind of us going into a bit of a reflection mode. And this was one, we each kind of have something we're going to talk about. And one thought I had was, was this just horrible timing for LA County? It's public knowledge that about $300 million went into the effort to make proprietary voting machines and technology. LA County paid, a massive sum for this, for the research and development and for the production and everything. But with this kind of advent of universal mail-in ballots, at least in California, going to everyone without even having to request one, will that 300 million be worth it? Will people turn out at the same level, or will we have all these kind of ghost town vote centers? And that's an interesting question to explore, what the electorate has in mind for the 2022 midterms. So next slide, please.
So last year, LA County used different voting machines, and it was really new and cool and exciting. And LMU students actually had the lucky opportunity that individuals from the registrar came and actually explained how these machines work to us. But some can argue that it was very new and it was difficult for people to figure out how to use them, causing voters to be a little bit more stressed. I personally knew how to use the machine, but when I went to vote, I was still like, oh no, what if I click the wrong thing or do something out of order? So it's definitely a little bit stressful. And so when the media talked about the long lines, and I know some machines were breaking, the first thing that came to my mind was, if voters were just taking more time to vote, because it's not as simple as they remembered it to be. It's a little bit new. So yeah, that was my final thoughts on the exit poll.
And then the final question I was looking at is voting by mail surged in popularity in the general election, as we all know, and will this trend last in LA County? My answer to that is ultimately yes, it will last for a while. Even after the pandemic, I think people will continue to choose this option of voting because I think people will just be too worried to gather. I think it's gonna be a while for that. And additionally, I feel that many may realize that vote by mail is easier. Because what I'm looking forward to mostly is how this will continue to be advertised even after the pandemic. Because back then it was pretty easy to say, oh, there's a virus, go vote by mail. But in addition to that, I'm looking after the pandemic, because I remember on March 3rd, lines were long on election day, even though voting had been available for about 10 days prior. So, and I know for the pandemic, as I was saying, people voted because everyone was kind of warned and cautioned to do that route of voting. So after this is all over, I wouldn't be surprised if people continue to vote by mail because it will be advertised as easier. Just looking back at the lines I remember on March 3rd, and because, like I said, I think people will be skeptical about gathering for a bit. So yes, to answer this question, the trend will last. I'm just looking forward to how it will continue to be advertised after the pandemic. Next slide. And then that's everything. Thank you all for coming.
All righty. Thank you all so much for doing a great job kind of showcasing a different side of the exit poll than what we typically have the opportunity to share when we're just looking at the results from the report or the news articles. So at this time, if there are any questions from the audience, we would love to take any of those.
I see one question in the chat, actually, from Stefani. And the question is, were people less receptive to talk and answer the survey this past election cycle given pandemic concerns?
I would say this, and this is just from just having collected all the surveys and given the timing of the coronavirus at the time, it was really before there was a lot of, it was before the lockdowns. So obviously people were less concerned. And I think judging from the volume of surveys that we got, that kind of concern about the pandemic hadn't really hit them yet. Because we got pretty much the same level as we did in 2018. But
even higher, I think.
Yeah, or higher, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and I will say this is one thing, we've been very fortunate that we do have a very high response rate when the students are approaching individuals and following their specific skip pattern, and they're asking individuals if they'll be willing to participate in the exit poll. By and large, most individuals will say yes, that they're willing to participate. We do have those that are headed to work or have to head off to one place or another. But this is not like a typical survey when you think about like market researchers. There's definitely something to be said. And I'm wondering if one of you could talk about that. What does it mean to be out there like with your LMU gear, and what do you see for the students that you supervise in terms of their receptiveness?
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of people that were excited and eager to like share what they just did with like LMU students and who they voted for. And there were individuals that were a little bit like more reserved and didn't really have the time or just didn't really want to answer a survey. And going back to this like talk of the pandemic, looking back on it, it's crazy that it's something we didn't really think about back then. But like there were like a few individuals with masks, but still like hundreds and hundreds of people at voting places. Like the pandemic we didn't even think it was going to get as bad as it did. Like we weren't even thinking about it that day.
Yeah. And I just wanted to mention, I remember, because yes, we weren't thinking about it the same way. And I remember just the days after, I'm thinking, hold on a second, we're all touching 3,600 papers, touched by 3,600 people at least. And I thought, oh gosh, I hope I hope we don't get sick. None of us got sick, thank goodness. But it was something that crossed my mind, but it was so early on that none of us thought about it too much.
Yes, and that was one of the major drivers of why we did not conduct an exit poll for the November election. So just the idea of having all of the students out there, like Mariya said, so many pieces of paper and so many interactions. We decided for student safety, we would not be conducting the exit poll. Instead, students and faculty and staff had the awesome opportunity of working at the vote center that LMU had down in Roskies. So that was a great opportunity. And there's a question from Bob asking if our analysis, did we see any indication of the strength in the effort to recall Gavin Newsom? Because this was done in March of last year, no, we weren't seeing, we weren't tracking, we weren't looking for those trends at the time, but we haven't had a metric to track that with the voters. Yeah, we shall see, but unfortunately, we don't have any particular data on that question. So, are there any other questions? One of the things I would want to ask for the students. So when you see the data about coming out from all of your work in news articles or see conversations on the news or on the radio, kind of what does that mean to you when you see those you know, after putting in that full day of work on election day?
I know for me, I always think like, I mean, there is a sense of pride, there is a sense of accomplishment. But the one thing I think about is kind of like, you know, I saw it first because I like actually handled the piece of paper and I was able to get up close with the data in a very like, you know, especially with this last, you know, election, just kind of all of the planning and the physical labor that went into it. It really is rewarding to see that, like, to see it out there in the news media, but also to think that, like, you know, it was me and my, you know, coworkers who I'm, you know, pretty close with, and you know, ones who I was close with at the time. Just to think that like it started just like a bunch of college students, you know, testing out scanning applications, and now it's all over the news. Like it's almost like watching like, you know, your pet grow up, or like a, you know, something like that. It's that kind of.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that it's just, you know, it feels good to know that you've made a contribution, you know, when you see your data being quoted by, you know, by the mayor, you know, I've seen, and also just in all these really prestigious newspapers and all these sites that just disperse news. It feels really good to be a part of the conversation, and it really does feel like you know, like you did something good. And I know for me personally that is something I've always kind of wanted in all of my projects and positions I've ever been a part of, to really know that you made a difference, that you did something cool for a whole community.
Yeah, and it's super cool to have this opportunity as undergraduates. Like sophomore year, I took a research methods course, and I'm like, it's great that I'm learning about it, but I actually get to apply all of this. So that's been incredible for me personally, just to have this be such a key part of my undergraduate career.
Thank you. And then another question in the Q&A about, is there any indication of the strength of right-wing populism in exit polling data? I know this is blue Los Angeles, but I'm curious if you noticed anything for our exit poll. The last time we were looking at how people voted. So we definitely have, although it's overwhelmingly Democratic here in Los Angeles County, we do certainly have Republicans voting. But in terms of asking questions about kind of getting at some of their beliefs, this time we focused on the effectiveness and their experience at the vote center to really see what were ways that we could help with the voting process down the road. But would any of you be willing to talk about kind of what is your experience? Not everybody is super excited that we're out doing the exit poll. But would anybody want to share any experiences either that you had or that you heard about from some of the students that you were supervising about what it was like to be out there?
I know for at least something I've heard and also have seen, that sometimes it's not necessarily the voters themselves, but sometimes the people that are running the vote center may be misinterpreting them as, our field researchers as a political group that's, maybe trying to persuade people to vote a certain way, because when we're out there, we're wearing these kind of bright, I know this time we wore like these bright red shirts, which I know red is the color of, the color of the Republican Party traditionally. So that could have been a way it was maybe misinterpreted by the people who are running the vote centers. But I know from my people, I never received reports of voters harassing them or calling them political operatives or anything, but there could have been other cases, but in my area.
Yeah, that's a good point about the colors. We've had blue in the past, the last couple of things. So we wanted to switch it up and still stay within the LMU, LMU color scheme. So, and then another question about, do you see the numbers of Republicans voting in LA trending upward or downward at this time? Over certainly the last several exit polls that we've done. We started doing the election projects back in the mid 2000s. We have seen the numbers decline for who they're ultimately voting for. We have a tendency to ask about their views in terms of political ideology. So where they are from very liberal, although very liberal, somewhat liberal, moderate, somewhat conservative, and very conservative. So we certainly see fewer individuals saying that they're on the very conservative side. But yeah, the number, curious to see if that will stabilize a bit, and obviously looking to see what that looks like in the upcoming elections with new candidates for the Republican side. But we also see a fair number of people who say that they're moderate or even somewhat conservative, but still are choosing to vote for the Democratic candidate in the last few elections. So. And do we ask about religious affiliation? We have asked about that on some of our surveys. I don't believe we asked that on the most recent exit poll. Again, kind of focusing on the voter experience. When we kind of come up with our initial list, we have about 3 times as many questions as what we have space to be asking, and then try to figure out how many questions we can fit. On the surveys, are we going to do, front is English, back is Spanish? Are we going to do, legal size, letter size? We've been playing around with a lot of these different kind of experiments in terms of the research methods over the years to kind of see what is the right fit. So we do have some data from previous elections about religious affiliation.
Yes, and Bria just shared in the chat that all our data is publicly available. So you just have to go to our website, find the report you're interested in, and you can see it in quite a lot of detail. So you're always welcome to do that. And Bria, I had a question for students.
Yeah.
Real quick. So one of the things, so guys, some of you have seen LA Votes at least twice, and you've seen how we try to edit the methodology, try to improve our process. It's a really long, tiring day, so you've seen some of the changes we've implemented. If you could do the study again, what would you do differently?
So I'll go first because I already have some responses to that. I personally feel that Qualtrics might have been more effective because that way the data is going in right away. I feel like with the scanning, we just added an extra step. We take the survey, then send it to you. So I don't know, just for efficiency, I feel like, Qualtrics would be the way to go. But if we are going to stay with scanning, I would say we need to train the non-study LA partners, because I know we had that and none of them were trained. So I couldn't really rely on my partner to do some of the scanning herself because she just wasn't trained to do it. So I would want everyone to be trained on however we're going to input the data, we train everyone to do that. And the second item I would say is just having more teams to collect the surveys. That way there can be more maximum input in a shorter amount of time, and also less driving for the supervisors, I guess. And that, because I feel that a lot of the stress comes from trying to, hit your stations and, to be punctual with hitting them. And so we could take away a lot of stress, I feel, and also just cutting down the driving if we just had more teams to collect surveys.
Mhm. So you're saying you want to have more than the 240 some students?
More supervisors. I should have made it a little more specific. More supervisors, not field researchers. I think that number is perfectly fine. We have them very well dispersed, but definitely more people to drive and pick them up.
Mhm. Thanks.
Yeah, and to add on to what Louis said, I definitely think that if we were to train our partners in scanning, that could be helpful. Although it was nice because sometimes like they were able to keep driving as you were scanning, so it's definitely a give and take. Both have pros and cons.
Mhm.
Yeah. This is when even in my master's degree, I didn't get much research experience. I took a bunch of classes on how to do it. And this hands-on is so important. You can read all about these methods. You can say, sounds good. At first we new students were saying, oh, the qualitrics take so long, because you have to sit there, you have to try to enter the surveys. So we tried to improve it and it sounded like a great idea. And then we realized, there's definitely some negatives to this new approach and maybe a simpler solution makes more sense here. But now you know that by experiencing it, by really being out there. And I just feel like this experience is so incredibly valuable moving forward, especially if you want to do any kind of research in the future. And I wanted to ask you, how do you think working at Study LA and doing this kinds of project, how can it help you in your future career, if so?
I'll start, and it's actually interesting because I know that all three of us actually want to do a different thing. Well, we don't all want to be lawyers, which is actually what a lot of LMU students want to do. I know for me, the path I'm on now, I'm applying for teaching credential programs in California, and I'd love to teach at the high school level, particularly history. And I think that actually one of the things that, and this might sound like a very roundabout way of connecting Study LA to what I'll do, but it would really, using my example, I would use it to provide encouragement to students, because in high school, statistics was I did very poorly at it. It was one of my least favorite subjects. And I was like, good thing I am never doing anything related to that, because I did not like that at all. Well, a few months later, I was at Study LA, and that's all we do. And I found that I was able to actually do the work pretty well, and I was able to understand it and get a hang of it. And I think one thing I would tell students is that, like, you can't, just don't doubt yourself. Like, you have the same DNA as any mathematician. You can do it. Just if you put your mind to it and have a positive attitude, then you can accomplish it.
Mm-hmm. John, I don't think you talked about that during your interview, about how much you disliked.
I selectively use my information from my experiences.
But I think that's so true, being able to kind of figure out what it is. Even if there are some barriers in what you've done in the past, figuring out, because there's so many different aspects of research that you're able to take. And for those who are watching this, John is one of our total whizzes when it comes to data analysis, and somebody we can really trust. So we definitely do not see any kind of concern or whatnot with any of his statistics skills. So, but that's a funny anecdote one I didn't know. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, no problem.
For me, so I actually do want to be a lawyer. I want to be an immigration lawyer. And so for me, studying Los Angeles, which obviously has a really big immigrant community, has been really important. And one of the projects I'm working on now and have actually had the opportunity to help manage is the Running Rosters project that the center goes over. And so that looks at Los Angeles County in California and at elected officials who hold the most influential offices. And it tracks them by race, ethnicity, gender, and political affiliation since 1950. So it's super interesting to look at how new voters elect different individuals and how those individuals do or don't represent the demographics of the county. So that's something I've been working on this year. And I'm actually presenting at both the Undergraduate Research Symposium and the Western Political Science Association conference. So it's really cool to get like a deep dive into all these things, because I know that it'll only help me in the future.
And then for me, I guess, because right now I'm in the background process for the LA County Sheriff's Department. So hopefully I'll be a deputy in the near future. And definitely for me though, data helps me understand my community. Overall, there's a big drive in policing to really use more data. I read an interesting article how they kind of do it, depending on crime rates and even down to the very person, even on how many times they've had their run-ins with the police. And so I definitely want to be a part of that wave. I want to understand it. And, data really helps me, it strengthens my knowledge in that. Second, also research helps me critically think. Not a lot of people say this, but research and law enforcement are more alike than we might like to believe. Number one would be, no assumptions without proof. You complete an investigation to find your answers. You ask good questions, and you really it helps you critically think about, building a case. And then the last thing would be regarding the thing I said earlier about our contribution. I know Bree and Ale are always talking about how important this work is and how good it is for the community. And that's the kind of enthusiasm that I want to take with me to really any department I choose to work for.
Mm, that's- Thank you all very much for sharing. Are there any additional questions from the audience that we can take about either the students' work, the work of the exit poll, Study LA's work, kind of in general? All righty. Well, Stephanie, thank you very much for this opportunity to allow the students to present as part of the symposium. We really appreciate just having the opportunity to share a bit more about the work that the students do and the incredible research that they're able to really kind of contribute to and add so much insight into the process. We've been doing these exit polls for about 15 years now, and just each year, just each iteration of the exit poll, we're able to kind of take another step farther and improve. We feel like we have the accuracy part down with some of the methods, but the actual logistics, being able to have debriefing sessions like what we're having here, what we're able to discuss here, but having debriefing sessions after the individual exit polls, and finding out new ways that we can improve, and more ways that students can interact with the data, has been very helpful, and I think is rewarding to the students as well. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.